The conference room aboard the Galactic Defense Council station buzzed with the quiet hum of translation devices and holographic displays. Captain Lisa Morgan sat at the human delegation table and adjusted the leather holsters at her hips. The twin revolvers rested there as they always did and felt like old friends against her sides. Around her, the representatives of a dozen alien species discussed matters of galactic security with the kind of confidence that came from 10,000 years of unopposed doctrine. The Zentari combat doctrine governed every military decision in known space and had done so since before Earth discovered fire. The theory was elegant in its simplicity and stated that combat efficiency directly correlated with technological advancement and energy output. Weapons were ranked on a scale from primitive to advanced, and projectile weapons, using chemical propulsion, sat at the very bottom of that scale. They were considered relics and museum pieces and toys for species too backward to understand modern warfare. Lisa had heard this lecture many times in her 3 years as Earth's military attaché, and every time someone noticed her revolvers, the reaction was the same. Polite curiosity followed by barely concealed amusement and then dismissal. The weapons were custom-built pieces that her grandfather had carried during his 40 years in law enforcement, and the craftsmanship was extraordinary. But to the galactic community, they might as well have been stone axes. Ambassador Valen of the Kryn hegemony stood at the central podium, and his scaled form caught the light from the viewports behind him. He was presenting Earth's application for full council membership, and from the tone of his voice, he was not impressed. The Kryn were a militant species who had built their reputation on military excellence, and Valen embodied every aspect of their warrior culture. The human delegation requests full membership and voting rights, Valen said, and his words came through the translator with obvious disdain. However, their military capabilities do not meet the minimum threshold established by council regulations. He activated a holographic display, and tactical simulations filled the air above the conference table. Human ships appeared in the projection, and they were small and used fusion drives and carried kinetic weapons alongside their limited energy arsenal. Kryn vessels surrounded them in the simulation, and their shields glowed with adaptive technology. Observe, Valen continued and gestured at the display. Human vessels rely heavily on mass driver technology and chemical propulsion missiles, and even primitive, gunpowder-based small arms. Against standard galactic shielding, these weapons are ineffective. The simulation played out exactly as he described, and human projectiles bounced harmlessly off Kryn shields, while energy weapons from the alien vessels tore through human defenses. It was a carefully constructed demonstration designed to humiliate, and it succeeded in drawing uncomfortable murmurs from several delegations. Lisa watched without expression, and her fingers drummed a quiet rhythm on the table. Beside her, Commander Jake Patterson of the Earth Defense Force shifted in his seat but remained silent. They had expected this resistance, and Earth's diplomatic strategy required patience. Furthermore, Valen said, and his confidence growing, humans continue to carry personal weapons that violate every principle of the Zentari combat doctrine. He pointed directly at Lisa. Captain Morgan wears devices that use controlled explosions to propel metal projectiles. This technology was obsolete before my species achieved spaceflight 10,000 years ago. Elder Mira of the Dalthene spoke up from across the chamber, and her voice was gentle but firm. Ambassador Valen, many species maintain ceremonial weapons as part of their cultural heritage. Surely, this is not grounds for dismissing Earth's application. I make no judgment on their culture, Valen replied, and though his tone suggested otherwise, I merely state facts according to established doctrine. Chemical propulsion weapons cannot penetrate modern shielding and cannot match the range or efficiency of energy weapons and cannot be integrated with tactical AI systems. They are primitive. Lisa cleared her throat, and the sound drew attention across the chamber. She stood slowly and smoothed her uniform jacket with deliberate care. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly, without the need for raising volume. "Ambassador Valen, I have a question," she said. "The Zentari combat doctrine has governed galactic warfare for 10,000 years, as you mentioned. In that time, how many conflicts have involved species outside the doctrine's technological assumptions?" Valen's expression shifted slightly, and uncertainty flickered behind his eyes. "I do not understand the relevance of this question." "How many?" Lisa pressed. "The doctrine assumes all participants have energy weapons and adaptive shielding and AI integration. But how many wars have you fought against opponents who don't use those technologies?" The chamber fell quiet, and several representatives leaned forward with interest. Valen opened his mouth and closed it and then said, "None. All civilized species achieve these technologies before achieving spaceflight. It is the natural order of development." "Natural for you, perhaps," Lisa said. "Earth developed differently. We achieved spaceflight while still using chemical propulsion and mass drivers, and yes, gunpowder weapons. We built space stations while our soldiers carried rifles, not plasma guns. You call it primitive, but we call it our history." She rested her hands on the revolvers at her hips, and the gesture was casual but drew every eye in the room. "These weapons belonged to my grandfather, and he never fired them in anger during 40 years of keeping the peace. They're not ceremonial, and they're not toys, and they're not museum pieces. They're tools, and on Earth we never throw away tools that work." Valen recovered his composure and smiled with the confidence of someone who knew he held the superior position. "Captain Morgan, I mean no disrespect to your family traditions, but sentiment does not change tactical reality. Your weapons cannot harm a shielded opponent, and this is mathematical fact, not opinion." "Mathematical fact based on untested assumptions," Lisa replied. "Your shields analyze energy signatures and adjust resistance accordingly. They're designed to counter energy weapons because that's all you've ever faced. But you've never tested them against weapons that don't produce detectable energy signatures." Until the moment of firing, the chamber erupted in murmurs, and several military advisors began consulting their data terminals. Valen's smile faded slightly, but he maintained his authoritative stance. "The Council appreciates Earth's perspective," he said, and his tone making clear he did not. "However, without demonstrated capability against modern defenses, humanity's application cannot be approved. The Zentari combat doctrine is not merely theory, and it is the foundation of galactic security." He returned to his seat and the discussion moved to other matters, but Lisa noticed several representatives watching her with new interest. Elder Mira caught her eye and gave a small nod that might have been approval or might have been sympathy. After the session ended, Jake found Lisa in the observation deck that overlooked the massive station, and Earth hung blue and white in the distance. "That was quite a speech," he said, "though I'm not sure it helped our case." "It planted a seed," Lisa replied. "Valen is arrogant, but he's not stupid, and he's going to wonder if I was bluffing." "Were you?" Jake asked. Lisa smiled and watched her homeworld turn slowly in the void. "The Kryn have been making moves near our colonies and expanding their territory in our direction and pushing boundaries to see if we'll push back. Sooner or later, Valen is going to escalate, and when he does, he's going to learn something important." "What's that?" "That the difference between primitive and effective," Lisa said and touched one of her revolvers, "is whether it gets the job done." 3 weeks after the council session, Earth received a formal communication through official diplomatic channels, and the message carried the seal of the Kryn hegemony. Lisa stood in the briefing room aboard the Frontier alongside Commander Jake Patterson and General Chris Bennett, who had traveled from Earth specifically for this meeting. The holographic display showed the Kryn message in stark translated text. "A challenge," General Bennett said, and his weathered face showing no emotion. "They're actually invoking the old combat trial protocols." Jake leaned forward and read the terms aloud. "The Kryn hegemony formally challenges humanity to resolve our territorial dispute through sanctioned combat trials as provided for in Galactic Council Regulations Article 742. Single combat between chosen champions and best-of-one engagement, and the victor's terms to be legally binding." "What are their terms?" Lisa asked, though she already suspected the answer. "If we lose, we cede 3 colony worlds," Jake continued. "New Montana and Perth Station and the Kepler settlement. If we win, they cease all territorial expansion in human space and support our full council membership." The room fell silent, and the weight of the stakes pressing down on everyone present. Those 3 colonies represented 15 years of human expansion and housed over 200,000 civilians. Losing them would be devastating both strategically and psychologically. "This is Valen's doing," General Bennett said. "He wants to humiliate us publicly and prove his point about primitive technology." "Who's their champion?" Jake pulled up another file, and a holographic image appeared showing a towering Kryn warrior in full combat armor. "Battlemaster Torvin, and decorated veteran and 43 consecutive victories in challenge duels. He's never lost a sanctioned combat." The image rotated and showed Torvin's armor in detail. Adaptive shielding covered every surface and capable of analyzing incoming attacks and adjusting resistance in microseconds. His primary weapon was a plasma lance that could punch through starship hulls, and his secondary systems included energy nets and pulse grenades and tactical AI support. "He's 7 feet tall," Jake added, "weighs nearly 400 pounds in armor, and has cybernetic enhancements to his reflexes and strength." "The Kryn don't choose champions lightly." General Bennett turned to Lisa, and his expression grim. "I'm recommending we send Lieutenant Ryan Cooper from Special Forces. He's trained with our latest energy weapons and has combat experience against simulated Kryn tactics. It's our best chance." "No," Lisa said quietly. Both men looked at her with surprise. "Captain Morgan," the general began. "I volunteer," Lisa said, and met his gaze steadily. "I'll be Earth's champion." Jake stood abruptly. "Lisa, you can't be serious. This isn't a diplomatic gesture. This is actual combat. Lethal force is permitted in challenge trials." "I know the rules," Lisa replied. "And I know what I'm doing." General Bennett shook his head. "Captain, you're an excellent officer, but you're not a frontline combatant. You carry those revolvers for ceremonial purposes, and Cooper is trained for this kind of engagement." "Cooper is trained to fight the way they expect," Lisa said. "He'll use energy weapons and modern tactics and adaptive strategies and everything the Zentari combat doctrine teaches. He'll fight their fight, and on their terms he'll lose." She walked to the holographic display and studied Torvin's armor. "That shielding is designed to counter energy weapons. It analyzes electromagnetic signatures and particle emissions and adjusts its resistance accordingly. It's sophisticated technology built on sophisticated assumptions, and your revolvers will somehow overcome it," General Bennett said with clear skepticism. "My revolvers don't produce detectable energy signatures until the moment the gunpowder ignites," Lisa explained. "No electromagnetic buildup, and no particle emissions, and no charging cycle. Just chemical propulsion, and that shield's eye has never encountered anything like it." Jake rubbed his face with both hands. "Even if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, you're talking about facing a warrior who has killed opponents in single combat. He's bigger and stronger and has enhancement systems and decades of experience. He has experience fighting other people who use energy weapons," Lisa countered. "He follows doctrine, and he trusts his equipment, and he's never faced someone who doesn't play by his rules. That's his weakness." She turned from the display and faced both men directly. "Earth didn't climb to the stars by following everyone else's path. We got here by being stubborn and adaptive and willing to use whatever works. That's what I'm offering, and a chance to fight smart instead of fighting fair. General Bennett was quiet for a long moment, and the internal debate visible on his face. Finally, he said, "The council will think we're insane. They'll see you walk into that arena with chemical weapons and assume we've given up. Let them think that," Lisa said. Underestimation is a tactical advantage. The general sighed and seemed to age a decade in that moment. "If I approve this, and you understand there's no backup plan, if you fall, those colonies are lost and Earth's reputation goes with them. I understand. And you still want to do this?" "Yes, sir." Another long pause, and then General Bennett nodded slowly. "God help us all. I'll submit your name as Earth's champion. You have 2 weeks to prepare before the challenge date." The message went out through official channels within the hour, and Earth named Captain Lisa Morgan as its chosen representative for trial by combat. The response from the galactic community was immediate and almost universally dismissive. News feeds across known space showed images of Lisa alongside Torvin, and the size difference alone seemed to tell the complete story. Elder Mira sent a private message expressing concern and offering Earth the chance to reconsider. Several smaller species sent similar communications, and their worry thinly veiled behind diplomatic language. Even allies who supported Earth's council membership privately questioned the decision. Valen's public statement was brief and dripping with false sympathy. "The Kryn hegemony respects Earth's choice of champion, though we question the wisdom of sending an officer armed with primitive weapons against a battlemaster. We offer Captain Morgan the opportunity to accept modern arms before the trial, and we would not want her death attributed to inadequate equipment." Lisa watched the statement with Jake in the Frontier's rec room. When it ended, she smiled slightly, and the expression cold enough to make Jake uncomfortable. "He's offering you a way out," Jake said. "You could accept their weapons and at least have a fighting chance." "He's trying to force me to validate his doctrine," Lisa replied. "If I accept energy weapons, then he wins even if I somehow beat Torvin. He gets to prove that modern technology is necessary and that human weapons are useless." She stood and stretched and rolled her shoulders like a fighter preparing for a match. "But if I walk in there with these," she touched her revolvers, "and I win, then the entire Zentari combat doctrine has to be reconsidered. Every assumption and every simulation and every tactical model they've built for 10,000 years gets called into question. And if you lose, then I die proving we tried something different." Lisa said simply, "But Jake, I've been training with these weapons since I was 12 years old. My grandfather taught me, and his father taught him, and this knowledge goes back centuries on Earth. The Kryn have better technology, but we have something they don't." "What's that?" "We remember what it was like before the technology," Lisa said. "We remember how to fight when the power fails and the shields drop and the AI stops working. We remember that a gun is just a tool and the person holding it matters more than the specifications." She headed for the door and paused at the threshold. 2 weeks until the challenge, and I'm going to spend every hour practicing and preparing and making sure that when I face Torvin, I'm ready. Not ready by his standards, but ready by mine." Jake watched her go, and the confidence in her stride, somehow both reassuring and terrifying. He pulled up the challenge documents again and read through the terms and the stakes and the protocols. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that maybe Lisa knew something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. He hoped that voice was right, because in 2 weeks, Earth's fate would be decided by twin revolvers against a plasma lance, and the whole galaxy would be watching. The proving grounds on the neutral world of Sanctum had witnessed thousands of challenge trials over the centuries, and the arena floor bore scars from plasma fire and energy weapons and exotic technologies that most humans couldn't even name. Today, it would witness something different, though the assembled crowd didn't know that yet. Lisa stood in the challenger's entrance tunnel and listened to the roar of thousands of alien spectators filling the arena stands. Holographic displays floated above, the crowd showing odds and statistics and tactical analyses that all predicted the same outcome. Torvin was favored 97-3, and the 3% given to Lisa was described as statistical courtesy rather than actual probability. Commander Jake Patterson stood with her in the tunnel, alongside General Bennett, who had insisted on being present. The general looked like a man attending a funeral, and his jaw tight with tension. "Last chance to accept their weapons," he said, without much hope. Lisa checked her revolvers for the dozenth time, and the familiar weight of them comforting in her hands. Each cylinder held 6 rounds of custom-loaded .357 Magnum, ammunition and hollow-point bullets that her grandfather had sworn by. She had 4 speed loaders on her belt, and another 24 rounds ready if needed. "These are my weapons," she said simply. The announcement system crackled to life, and the translator rendering the words in a dozen languages simultaneously. Battlemaster Torvin of the Kryn hegemony and defender of the challenged territory. The crowd erupted as Torvin emerged from the opposite tunnel. His armor gleamed under the arena lights, and every surface covered in adaptive shielding that shimmered with barely contained energy. The plasma lance in his hands hummed with power, and the weapons reactor visible through transparent housing. He raised his arms to acknowledge the crowd, and their cheers doubled in volume. "Captain Lisa Morgan of Earth and Challenger." The announcer continued, and the tone noticeably less enthusiastic. Lisa walked into the arena, and the sudden exposure to thousands of watching eyes washing over her like a physical force. The cheers died down considerably, and replaced by murmurs of confusion and pity. She heard translations fragments through the audio, pickups, and many of them variations on the same theme, and primitive weapons and ceremonial suicide and humans don't understand modern combat. She ignored them and focused on Torvin across the arena floor. He stood perfectly still and assessed her with the practiced eye of a veteran warrior. Even at this distance, Lisa could see his posture shift slightly, and the confident relaxation of someone who had already decided this fight was over. Elder Mira's voice came through the communication channel to both combatants. "The challenge trial will commence according to Galactic Council protocols, and combat continues until one champion yields, or is rendered unable to continue, and lethal force is sanctioned but not required." "Champions acknowledge." "Acknowledged," Torvin said, and his voice deep and resonant. "Acknowledged," Lisa replied. "Then let honor decide the outcome," Myra said. "Begin." The word had barely left her lips when Torvin activated his full combat systems, and the distinctive whine of charging plasma weapons filled the arena. His tactical display lit up with targeting data, and his eye analyzing Lisa's position and movement patterns and probable dodge vectors. He fired. 3 plasma bolts screamed across the arena floor, and each one capable of melting through starship armor. The Xanthari combat doctrine called for overwhelming initial fire to test an opponent's defenses and establish tactical dominance. Lisa moved. She didn't run for cover because there was none close enough, and she didn't try to dodge because plasma moves faster than human reflexes. Instead, she moved forward and to the left at an angle, and her eyes not on the plasma bolts, but on Torvin himself. His shoulders had shifted slightly before firing, and his weight transferring in a pattern that telegraphed his aim points. His AI might be perfect, but his body still obeyed physics, and Lisa had spent 20 years learning to read body language in high-stress situations. The plasma bolts passed through empty air where standard evasion protocols would have taken her. Torvin's tactical display showed anomalous results, and his eye flagging the miss as outside predicted parameters. Lisa kept moving forward and closed the distance between them with steady, purposeful strides. Her hands went to her revolvers and the leather holsters worn smooth from years of practice draws. Torvin fired again and adjusted his aim to compensate for her unexpected movement. 4 more plasma bolts, and these ones spread in a wider pattern to limit her evasion options. Lisa dropped into a slide, and her boots finding purchase on the arena floor as she went low beneath the spread. She came up from the slide with both revolvers drawn and the movement fluid as water. The crowd gasped and watching a combat maneuver that looked more like dance than warfare. Torvin's shields activated automatically as Lisa raised her weapons and the AI system detecting the threat and cycling through response protocols. It analyzed electromagnetic signatures and found none. It searched for particle emissions and found none. It calculated energy buildups and found none. Lisa fired. The sound of gunfire cracked across the arena, and harsh and primitive, and completely out of place among all the humming energy weapons. 6 shots in rapid succession, and both revolvers firing in controlled rhythm and the muzzle flash bright in the arena lights. Torvin's shields flared and tried to calculate resistance. The AI system searched its entire database for similar weapon signatures and found nothing. Chemical propulsion wasn't supposed to be a threat, and adaptive shielding was designed to be effective against everything from plasma to antimatter. But the shield couldn't adjust to a threat it couldn't analyze. 5 bullets hit Torvin's armor, and the impacts spreading across his chest plate and shoulder guards. The 6th caught the edge of his helmet and left a bright scoring mark. None of them penetrated fully, but the impacts staggered him backward 3 steps. For the first time in 43 challenge duels, Torvin felt something he hadn't experienced in years in genuine surprise. The impacts felt wrong and primitive, and like being hit with thrown rocks despite all his sophisticated protection. His armor registered the hits but couldn't classify the damage type and his repair systems, uncertain whether to treat this as kinetic impact or some unknown energy form. The crowd fell silent, and the statisticians and analysts suddenly uncertain of their predictions. Jake gripped the railing in the observation area hard enough to hurt his hands, and General Bennett leaned forward with new intensity in his eyes. Lisa didn't pause to admire her shots, and she kept moving and circling left while her thumbs worked the revolver hammers, and 6 more rounds chambered and ready. Torvin recovered from his surprise and adjusted his tactics. If his shields couldn't stop her weapons reliably, then he would rely on his armor's thickness and his superior strength. He charged. The Kryn warrior closed the distance with impressive speed for something his size, and his plasma lance held ready to strike. The Zentari combat doctrine emphasized different weapon systems for different ranges, and close combat favored the larger, stronger opponent. Lisa holstered her right revolver, and her hand going to her belt. Torvin saw the movement and assumed she was retreating from close combat, and his confidence returning, he was wrong. Lisa pulled a speed loader from her belt, and her left hand opening the cylinder of her remaining revolver without looking. 6 empty casings fell to the arena floor with tiny, metallic sounds, and 6 fresh rounds slid into place with practiced precision. The cylinder snapped closed, and she raised the weapon again. All of this happened in under 3 seconds. Torvin swung his plasma lance, and the weapon designed to be devastating at close range. Lisa ducked under the swing and fired twice more into his knee joint where armor plates met and flexibility required thinner protection. The bullets punched through, not deeply, but enough to damage the servo mechanisms beneath, and Torvin's left leg buckled slightly. His AI flagged multiple system failures, and his shields, still unable to properly calibrate against weapons that operated on principles older than galactic civilization. He attempted to correct and brought his lance around for a backswing, but Lisa was already moving and staying inside his reach where the long weapon was less effective. She fired twice more into his right elbow joint, and then twice into the sensor array on his helmet. Torvin's vision display cracked and his tactical AI losing input data. His shields flickered and drained power trying to calculate responses to attacks they weren't designed to counter. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind, and the mathematical certainty of the Zentari combat doctrine suddenly seeming less absolute. The crowd found its voice again, and the murmurs rising to shouts. Holographic displays scrambled to update odds that no longer made sense, and analysts argued with each other trying to explain what they were seeing. Elder Mira watched from the council observation box, and her expression unreadable. Beside her, Ambassador Valen stood frozen, and his confident smile long since disappeared. Lisa stepped back and gave herself space, and her revolvers tracking Torvin as he struggled to stabilize. She had fired 18 rounds and 6 remained between both weapons. Her breathing was steady and controlled, and the adrenaline sharp in her veins, but not controlling her. Torvin activated his emergency protocols, and Torvin modified his approach, and the certainty of easy victory replaced by careful calculation. His tactical AI, I fed him damage reports and multiple systems compromised, and shield efficiency down to 60%. None of his previous 43 opponents had managed to damage him this extensively, and certainly not with weapons that predated spaceflight. He circled left and kept his plasma lance between himself and Lisa while his armor's auto-repair systems worked to restore damaged servos. The wound in his knee joint limited his mobility, but Kryn warriors trained to fight through injury. Pain was temporary, but failure in combat was permanent. Lisa mirrored his movement and maintained optimal distance, and her revolvers ready but not firing. She counted rounds in her head like a mantra, and 12 shots, remaining in 4 speed loaders on her belt, and 96 total rounds if this went the distance. Every bullet mattered, and wasted shots could mean defeat. The crowd had stopped cheering, and thousands of aliens watching in near silence as something impossible continued to unfold. Holographic displays showed biometric data from both combatants and Torvin's stress levels elevated beyond normal parameters, while Lisa's remained surprisingly steady. In the observation area, Jake gripped the railing and watched every movement. Beside him, General Bed had his tactical tablet out and recording everything for later analysis. Both men had stopped breathing normally, and their attention absolute. "She's reading him," the general muttered. "Watch how she moves before he fires." "She's not reacting to his weapons, she's reacting to him." Jake saw it then, and the way Lisa's eyes never left Torvin's center mass. She wasn't watching his lance, or his hands, or even his feet. She watched his core, and where his weight shifted, and where his balance told the truth about his intentions. Torvin made his decision and switched tactics again. The Xanthari combat doctrine included provisions for unconventional opponents, and he accessed combat protocols designed for enemies who used unexpected methods. If direct assault was ineffective, then he would use area denial. He fired his plasma lance in a wide sweep, and not aimed at Lisa directly, but at the arena floor between them. The superheated plasma scorched the ground and left glowing molten tracks that created barriers to movement. He fired again and again and created a pattern of impassable terrain that forced Lisa to choose between limited approach vectors. It was solid tactical thinking based on sound doctrine, and it would have worked against any opponent using standard galactic weapons. Lisa ran, not away from the barriers but toward them, and her boots finding purchase on still cool sections of floor. She vaulted over a low molten section and rolled beneath a higher barrier and came up firing. 2 shots rang out and both aimed at Torvin's weapon hand. The first bullet struck his gauntlet and cracked the armored plating around his wrist. The second hit the plasma lance itself and impacted the transparent reactor housing. The lance flickered and the containment field destabilized by the physical impact. Torvin immediately shut down the weapon and standard safety protocols, activating to prevent catastrophic failure. For 3 seconds he stood weaponless while the lance's system cycled through emergency shutdown. 3 seconds was enough. Lisa closed the distance and fired 4 more rounds into his damaged knee joint, and the concentrated fire finally punching through the compromised armor completely. Torvin's leg buckled and his massive weight working against him as his servos failed. He dropped to one knee, and his lance coming back online, but his position now severely disadvantaged. He swung the weapon in a desperate arc, but Lisa had already moved and circled behind him, where his armor's bulk limited his rotation speed. She pressed both revolvers against the back of his helmet, where the armor was thinner to allow for neck movement and the barrels cool against the metal. "Yield," she said quietly. Torvin froze, and his tactical display showing him the impossible situation. His shields couldn't activate fast, enough to stop point-blank shots at his armor's thinnest point, and his weapon couldn't rotate fast enough to threaten her, and his mobility was compromised. The Zentari combat doctrine had specific guidelines for this scenario, and when defeat was mathematically certain and honor required acknowledgement. But 43 victories created habits and patterns and expectations. He had never yielded before, and every instinct screamed against it. "I can heal from bullets to the head," he said, and his translator rendering the defiance clearly. "Maybe," Lisa replied. "But you'll have to explain to your medical team how you got shot in the back of the head, because you were too stubborn to admit defeat. That's not a warrior's death, that's just stupid death." The crowd held its collective breath, and thousands of beings, waiting to see if the Kryn Battlemaster would choose death over surrender. Torvin's hand moved, and not toward his weapon, but upward and open-palmed. The traditional Kryn gesture of yield. "I submit," he said, and his voice carrying across the arena. "Captain Morgan has won this trial by combat." The arena exploded in sound and shock and disbelief and confusion, all mixing into a roar that shook the stands. Holographic displays scrambled to update, and analysts argued frantically, and somewhere in the crowd a small group started chanting Lisa's name. Lisa stepped back and lowered her revolvers, but kept them ready until Torvin powered down his remaining combat systems completely. Only when his armor went into standby mode did she holster her weapons, and the leather creaking softly, she walked around to face Torvin and extended her hand toward him. The gesture confused him initially, and Kryn combat tradition didn't include helping defeated opponents. But Lisa's expression was clear, and this was respect, not pity. Torvin accepted her hand and used it to lever himself upright despite his damaged leg. The action would be analyzed later by military historians across the galaxy, and the moment when Earth's champion showed that victory didn't require humiliation. "You fought with honor," Lisa said. "Your skills are impressive, and under different circumstances this could have ended very differently. You fought unlike anything I've encountered," Torvin replied, in grudging respect in his voice. "The Zentari combat doctrine prepared me for energy weapons and plasma fire and antimatter charges. It did not prepare me for you, because the doctrine assumed everyone would fight the same way," Lisa said. "That's its flaw. It's perfect for the wars you've already fought, but useless for the ones you haven't." The medical teams rushed onto the arena floor, and both human and Kryn medical personnel ready to treat injuries. Lisa waved them off, and her only damage some bruising from the athletic maneuvers and adrenaline still keeping the pain distant. Torvin allowed his team to stabilize his leg, and the servos whining as they locked into transport mode. Elder Mira's voice came through the arena speakers, and her tone carefully neutral. "The challenge trial has concluded according to protocols, and Captain Lisa Morgan of Earth is declared victor. The terms of the challenge are hereby binding on both parties." In the observation area, Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and General Bennett allowed himself a small smile. Around them, other human observers erupted in celebration, and the tension breaking like a dam. But in the Kryn observation box, Ambassador Valen stood silent, and his expression frozen between shock and calculation. Beside him, military advisors scrolled through combat data, and their previous certainties crumbling under the weight of recorded evidence. Lisa walked toward the exit tunnel, and the crowd parting to let her through. Some aliens reached out to touch her as she passed, and a gesture of respect in several cultures. Others simply stared and trying to reconcile what they had witnessed with everything they thought they knew about warfare. Jake met her at the tunnel entrance, and his grin wide enough to hurt. "You actually did it. You beat a Kryn battlemaster with revolvers." "I beat his assumptions," Lisa corrected. "Torvin is a skilled warrior, but he trusted his doctrine too much and his own judgment too little. The moment he decided I couldn't be a threat, he had already lost." General Bennett arrived, and his tactical tablet clutched in his hands. "Captain Morgan, that was the most unorthodox combat performance I have ever witnessed, and I've been in this military for 30 years. You just rewrote every tactical manual in human space." "No, sir," Lisa said, and her fatigue starting to show now that the adrenaline was fading. "I just proved that the old manuals still work, and we just forgot to read them." She touched her revolvers and the weapons that had changed everything. "These belonged to my grandfather, and before him, his father, and before that, someone else, who needed reliable tools for dangerous work. They've been protecting people for over 200 years, and today they protected 3 colony worlds. They did more than that," the general said quietly. "They protected Earth's future in the galaxy. Once the Council ratifies this trial, we'll have full membership and voting rights, and most importantly, respect." Lisa nodded and then swayed slightly as exhaustion caught up with her. Jake steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you back to the frontier before you collapse. You can be a hero tomorrow, but today you need rest." As they walked back through the tunnels, Lisa could still hear the crowd behind them, and the sound different now, and not dismissive or pitying, but genuinely awed. In one afternoon, she had challenged 10,000. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, exactly 12 hours after the challenge trial concluded, and the chamber filled with representatives who still struggled to process what they had witnessed. Holographic recordings played on loop showing Lisa's victory from multiple angles, and each viewing somehow making it seem less believable rather than more. Elder Mira called the session to order, and her ancient voice cutting through the murmurs and arguments. "The challenge trial between the Kryn hegemony and humanity has concluded, according to established protocols, and the outcome is legally binding regardless of personal opinions about the methods employed." Ambassador Valen stood, and his posture rigid with barely controlled emotion. "Elder Mira, the Council must consider the implications of this outcome. The Zentari combat doctrine has governed galactic warfare for 10,000 years, and if we allow primitive weapons to be considered effective, then we undermine the entire foundation of military theory." "The doctrine was not on trial," Myra replied calmly. "Battlemaster Torvin was, and he acknowledged defeat according to Kryn honor codes. Does the hegemony now claim its own warrior lacks the judgment to recognize defeat?" The question hung in the air, and Valen opened his mouth and closed it in the trap evident. Questioning Torvin's judgment would dishonor the Kryn warrior tradition, and accepting his judgment meant accepting the outcome. "The hegemony honors Battlemaster Torvas's decision," Valen said finally, and each word clearly costing him. "We will abide by the terms of the challenge. The territorial expansion into human space will cease, and we will support Earth's application for full Council membership." Collective murmur ran through the chamber, and several smaller species, who had been watching Earth with interest, now leaned forward with renewed attention. "Then let the records show," Myra announced. "That effective immediately humanity is granted provisional council status with full voting rights pending the standard integration period. Furthermore, the Kryn hegemony's territorial claims against the colonies of New Montana and Perth Station and Kepler settlement are hereby nullified." The decision was met with mixed reactions, and some delegates applauding while others sat in stunned silence. But the law was clear, and challenge trial outcomes could not be appealed or overturned. After the session ended, Lisa found herself surrounded by representatives from a dozen species, and all wanting to speak with Earth's champion. Some offered congratulations and others asked technical questions about her weapons, and a few simply wanted to understand how she had done the impossible. A Dalthine military advisor approached with obvious curiosity in his large eyes. "Captain Morgan, I have studied the combat recordings extensively, and I must ask how you predicted Battlemaster Torvan's attack patterns. Your evasion timing suggests precognitive abilities." Lisa smiled, and the question one she had answered several times already. "No precognition, just observation. Torvan's armor weighs over 300 pounds, and physics says his body has to shift weight before he can move or fire. I watched his center of mass and let his own movements tell me his intentions. But the Zentari combat doctrine accounts for such tells," the advisor protested. "Modern targeting AI compensates for biological patterns. The AI compensates when it's fighting other AI," Lisa explained. "Torvan relied on his systems to aim while I relied on my eyes and training. His AI was looking for energy signatures and charge cycles and electromagnetic buildups. It wasn't looking for a person reading body language." The advisor's expression shifted to something like understanding. "You fought like someone from before technological warfare. I fought like someone who learned that technology fails and weapons jam and systems crash," Lisa replied. "On Earth, we teach people to fight as if their equipment will betray them, because sooner or later it will. The person matters more than the tools." Word of the conversation spread quickly, and military academies across the galaxy began requesting copies of Earth's combat training materials. The requests came from species who had spent centuries trusting doctrine over instinct and suddenly realizing they had forgotten fundamental skills. 3 days after the trial, Torvam requested a private meeting with Lisa aboard the Frontier. Jake wanted to refuse in concern for security obvious, but Lisa overruled him. The Kryn Battlemaster had earned the right to speak. Torvan arrived in civilian clothing, and his damaged leg supported by a medical brace. He moved with visible discomfort, but refused assistance and his pride intact despite the defeat. Lisa met him in the observation deck, and Earth visible through the viewport behind her. "Captain Morgan," Torvan began, and his tone formal. "I come to speak warrior to warrior, not as ambassador or representative." "I'm listening," Lisa said. "I have fought in 44 challenge trials," Torvan continued. "I have faced opponents from 20 different species and wielded weapons of every classification in the galactic arsenal. I have studied the Zentari combat doctrine since childhood, and I believed I understood the nature of combat." He paused and seemed to gather his thoughts. "You taught me that I understood only one kind of combat, and the kind fought by those who share the same assumptions and use the same technologies and follow the same doctrines. You fought differently, not because you lacked our weapons, but because you chose different weapons. The choice was strategic," Lisa said. "Your shields were designed to stop energy weapons, and they're very good at that. But they're only good at what they were designed for." "Yes," Torvan agreed. "And this is the flaw Ambassador Valen refuses to acknowledge. The Zentari combat doctrine is not wrong, but it is incomplete. It assumes all future wars will resemble past wars, and this assumption may destroy us." Lisa tilted her head with interest. "What do you mean?" "The galaxy has known peace between major powers for 3,000 years, Torvan explained. "Small conflicts and border disputes and occasional piracy, but no true wars between advanced civilizations. We have grown comfortable, and we assume our doctrine is proven, because it has not been truly tested." He gestured toward Earth through the viewport. "Your species developed differently, and you achieved spaceflight, while still fighting wars with chemical weapons and kinetic projectiles and simple explosives. You never abandoned the old ways, even as you discovered new ones. This makes you dangerous in ways the doctrine cannot measure." "Are you saying you see Earth as a threat?" Lisa asked carefully. "No," Torvan said. "I am saying I see Earth as essential. The galaxy needs species who think differently, and who question assumptions, and who remember that doctrine is a guide, not a prison. My defeat was humbling but also enlightening. He removed something from his belt and held it out to Lisa. It was a Kryn honor blade and a ceremonial weapon given only to warriors who had earned profound respect. I cannot carry this while knowing I lost to someone I dismissed as primitive, Torvin said. Either I am unworthy of this blade or you are worthy of recognition. I choose to believe the latter. Lisa accepted the blade and the weight of it significant beyond the physical. Thank you, Battlemaster Torvin. This means more than you know. Use it well, he replied. And perhaps someday teach others what you taught me that. Victory belongs to those who adapt, not those who merely follow what has always worked before. After Torvin departed, Jake found Lisa still holding the honor blade and staring out at Earth. That was unexpected, Jake said. He's a good warrior, Lisa replied. Good enough to learn from defeat instead of just resenting it. The galaxy needs more people like him. They're naming things after you, Jake said and pulled up his data tablet. 3 new defense academies are including coursework called Human Tactical Philosophy, and there's a proposal to amend the Xanthari combat doctrine to include pre-technological combat systems. Lisa laughed, and the sound genuine. They're going to teach people to use revolvers. Some of them, yes, Jake confirmed. But more importantly, they're teaching people to question their assumptions and to prepare for enemies who don't fight fair, and to remember that old methods aren't automatically inferior methods. He scrolled through more messages. Admiral Kate Sullivan wants to meet with you when you return to Earth, and apparently every military contractor in human space wants to hire you as a consultant. And the museum on Luna is requesting to display your revolvers. The revolvers stay with me, Lisa said firmly. They're not museum pieces, they're working tools, and my grandfather would haunt me if I retired them after one fight. Fair enough, Jake grinned. So what happens now? Lisa turned from the viewport and her expression thoughtful. Now we go home and we help Earth transition into full council membership, and we remember that today's victory doesn't mean tomorrow's safety. The Kryn won't be the last species to challenge us, and weapons are only as good as the people using them. She touched the twin revolvers at her hips, and the leather warm from years of wear. But we showed the galaxy something important, and we showed them that humanity survived Earth by being adaptable and tough and willing to use whatever worked. Those lessons don't expire just because we reached the stars. The Frontier departed Sanctum Station 6 hours later, and Earthbound with a crew that walked a little taller and spoke a little prouder. The challenge trial had changed something fundamental, and not just for